Good morning. It's a very great pleasure to be with all of you and to take part in this conference on the occasion of John Paul II and Ronald Reagan legacy. You know, I feel myself as a kind of an artifact. What I would like to say to you will be kind of a probably eyewitness report. Let me start with a quotation. It will be a long quotation from the editorial published in Warsaw Underground Press, written by us, the editors at that time, May 79, a few days before first visit of Polish Pope to Poland. For the people of Poland, the election of Karol Wojtyła during a conclave in faraway Rome was, regardless of a sense of well-deserved satisfaction, astonishing, and so their elation and joy were even greater. The awareness of how closely the event is bound up with the fate of the whole nation will become apparent only during those several days in June when John Paul II will visit Poland. The effect on the Poles will be increased manifestation of their Catholic faith in public life. People will more willingly describe themselves as Catholics, even though believers are still treated by the authorities as second-class citizens. Being Catholic will now become a way to identify with the Polish Pope, who is going to embody and bring together their scattered emotions, hopes, and desires. Religious phenomena are never separate from social phenomena, especially in Poland, where the Catholic Church is the most powerful institution independent of the communist authorities. It is also a symbol and guarantor of national identity under siege. Just imagine the crowds of people who will come to the cities of Warsaw, Częstochowa, Gniezno, and Krakow, the human initiative that will be unleashed during preparations for John Paul's II visit, and you will come to realize the attitude of the people and the potential effects of the events the visit may set in motion. Millions of people will be together in very sense of the word. The people will be able to count their number, and the result of this unofficial poll impossible to falsify because everybody will see it with his own eyes, must deeply influence the shared imagination, the society's assessment of itself. It will obviously have political implication, as we must not forget that the Pope is coming to the country at quite a critical time. The last 35 years have brought to the Polish people a threat of spiritual Sovietization and economic malaise. As the crisis of the communist power deepened over the last couple of years, independent underground institutions have embarked on increasingly popular effort to rebuild civil society through this Social Self-Defense Committee Corps, the Society of Educational Courses, the Defense Movement, Farmers' Committees, independent labor unions, underground censored press, and up until then, hopelessness. A direct result of Poland's geopolitical situation made the Polish Communist Party rule much, much easier. The far-reaching implication of the papal visit may, however, turn out to be a great significance for the Poles' shared imagination. It is bound to steer national identity and at the deepest level. The papal visit will likely be unlike any other event. John Paul II becomes a symbol of hope that victory over the trials of the history is possible. The nation that suffered so many misfortunes and humiliations may yet overcome the lack of faith that so often plagues the deeply and repeatedly disappointed. After all, the symbols that comprise national identity often prompt actions whose effects seem most real. It all has a deep effect on us living on the Vistula River, but we must be aware that these phenomena are also important for other European captive nations living under Soviet yoke. This is particularly true of Ukraine, Lithuania, and Belarus, where Catholicism and the union with Rome are still alive. John Paul II's visit is not exclusively a Polish event, just as his stay at Pueblo was not exclusively Mexican event. This is what we wrote in Poland that time. And then he came. He met 13 million Poles in the course of 9 days. He came like a sovereign, the communist stewards having disappeared. The Pope ruled everything, from the Polish hearts to the communist militia, completely unnecessary, by the way. He talked about human rights, about freedom, about the necessity of being in solidarity with each other, about community. He talked to all of us together, but we felt that he was talking to each of us individually. He turned decades of communist efforts into nothing. Their power was based on fear and destruction of our sense of national community. He also talked about responsibility, everybody's responsibility for everybody. He talked about God. And we answered with millions of voices singing, "We want God." My chcemy Boga, as the words of an old Polish song go. His words brought back to us the very foundations of the Polish nation's existence, with its roots in Christianity and Roman republicanism. Poland is a strange state where elected kings ruled a respublika, shaped after the Roman example. A Slavonic state where the elites spoke Latin. We listened to his words enchanted and transfigured. City streets suddenly turned into meeting places where we exchanged smiles. Overcome with joy, we found a sense of bond with strangers standing next to us. We felt free at last. And then he left. A year had passed and the Poles arose. The phenomenon of solidarity, a liberation movement 10 million people strong, came into being within 3 months. The fact that it came into being as a labor union was in a way by chance. It was in fact just another Polish uprising. August 1980 became a milestone not only for Polish history, but also in the history of Europe and the world. It was so because it heralded the end of communism. And it's necessary to say that without John Paul II, there would never have been solidarity. Ronald Reagan observed these events in Poland. By that time, he was a veteran of resistance against communist falsehood. Suffice it to recall his struggles with the unions infiltrated by the communists in Hollywood. Thanks to John O'Sullivan's account, we know, because John's book has been translated into Polish, we know about his emotional reaction to the TV report from John Paul's II visit to Poland. He was so deeply moved. It was mentioned already today. I think that it must have been that he found a great ally in Karol Wojtyła, the Polish Pope. The reason why I believe that is as follows. Once again, I know it from John O'Sullivan's book. When asked by Richard Allen in 1977 about his Cold War strategy, Ronald Reagan said, "My terror of the Cold War is that we win and they lose." To win, Reagan needed an ally when he was setting off his crusade. And then shots were fired. Hinckley was insane, but Ali Akbar was Moscow's pawn. The President and the Pope suffered alike, and they shared the conviction that God, our Lord, wanted them to complete their mission in this world. The existence of being a target of an assassination attempt at almost the same time must have brought them together. Ronald Reagan was called a crusader, and he was one. What that meant for him was that he made his decisions based on his faith in God and acted on the conviction that the evil empire exists. This conviction likely became basis of the President's alliance with the Pope, who by restoring hope and sense of dignity deprived this empire, evil empire, of its subjects. They met. John Paul's message to the nations of the world was the roots of freedom. Was that the roots of freedom are in gospel and in God, and that freedom is everyone's inherent right. Ronald Reagan decided to take care of the freedom of nations in practice. It was not an easy thing to say in the early 80s that his objective was to bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union. What is more, he intended to accomplish it with peaceful means. They were both courageous. They were also visionary and consistent. They were romantic in the Polish sense of mystical romanticism, yet at the same time they were cautious, aware of dangers, and often pragmatic. They were patient. They were able to wait. And most of all, they kept a sense of humor through all of this. It is important for the leaders not to lose sense of humor. The martial law in Poland, arms race imposed by Reagan on the Soviets, problems with Europeans infiltrated by the communists who protested against cruise and Pershing missiles, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Grenada, etc. These were lesser and greater fronts of the war declared by Ronald Reagan on communism, a war actively supported in the sphere of ideas and spirit by John Paul II, in accordance with the credo addressed to the cardinals just after his election. He said, we should all strive by all possible means to make all forms of injustice still manifest in our times a subject of our shared consideration, and we should search for proper solutions so that all people can lead truly human lives. They won. The enslaved nations of Central Europe reached for independence. Berlin Wall collapsed, and soon after so did communism in Russia. Between 89 and 91 could believe that the world of freedom triumphed over the evil empire, also in the metaphysical sense. It almost seemed that Bulgakov's behemoth would never again wreak havoc around Moscow. Wrong. A quarter of a century has passed since the seemingly final victory of Western civilization over the Eastern satrap, and we have a problem again. Minus after the victory, the idea of the West with the capital W, was being pushed out of the public discourse. Francis Fukuyama announced the end of history. But look, the old is back, dressed up in new clothes. Decadence and lack of ideas permeate the West. Real dreams are overwhelmed by media mush. John Paul II and Ronald Reagan entered the historical stage at the time of crisis. It seems then, in the 70s, that communism was winning on all fronts. The Soviet Union was triumphant. Terrorism supported by Moscow threatened Western democracies. And yet, they managed to overcome all this. Unfortunately, their success lulled their successors. The West is in crisis, and it is a crisis originated at its roots by negation of the fundamental values that formed our civilization and gave it strength. The problem was revealed during the discussion on the preamble to the proposed so-called European Constitution. A significant group of European politicians decided to expel from it the reference to the Christian roots of our identity. The transatlantic ties are cracking. Europe is unable to make decisions. The situation obviously resembles the last decades of the Roman Empire. Are we facing the same fate? Will the works of our classical authors have to be saved by monks in a few monasteries? Will we have to experience the age of fall and slavery again? I exaggerate, many will say. However, it is worth considering. The future depends on us, on our choice of leaders capable of understanding the legacy of the Polish Pope and the great American president. There are signs of awakening. The American, Polish, and Hungarian people have set the example. We may have a chance if the nations of the West find the right people amongst them. The West needs leadership. Without it, we will be deep in trouble in the years to come. John Paul II and Ronald Reagan's legacy can be summed up in one sentence, already mentioned today. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of free thought or idea. Don't be afraid to trust God with the fate of your nations. Don't be afraid of hardship, and be wise. Simple, isn't it? Thank you very much.